I bought the abandoned house the way most bad decisions start. Confidently, quickly, and with the kind of optimism that makes contractors rub their hands together in prayer. It was a motivated seller situation, which is real estate code for the place having a personality problem. The listing photos had that suspicious wide-angle look where every room seems bigger than reality and every shadow seems like it's hiding a second mortgage. Still, it sat on a little hill at the edge of town with a narrow driveway, a sagging porch, and a backyard that had once been a garden before the weeds won the war. The price was low enough that my brain started inventing reasons it was meant for me. I told myself I wanted quiet, a fresh start, space, independence. All true. But if I'm honest, I also like the idea of walking into a room and thinking mine. No roommates, no landlords, no one leaving passive-aggressive notes about dishes. Just me and a house that couldn't complain because it was too busy falling apart. The first day I moved in, I learned the house could absolutely complain. It just did it in a language of creaks, groans, and little taps in the walls that sounded like someone trying to get my attention without being rude about it. I ignored most of it. Old houses settle. They sigh. They have moods. They make noises at night like they're remembering things. I could handle that. I grew up in a place where the plumbing sounded like it was clearing its throat before deciding whether to work. The first night, I slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor because my bed frame hadn't arrived. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes got heavy, listening to the wind scrape branches against glass. Then, around 2:13 a.m., I heard something from beneath me. Not a creak, not a pipe, a thump, low, dull. Like someone knocked once from below, and then waited to see if I'd answer. I sat up, heart kicking into alert mode. The floorboards were cold under my palm. I held my breath and listened. Silence. Then another thump, softer this time, followed by a faint scraping sound like something shifting across packed dirt. My brain tried to help. Old foundation. Rodents. Loose beams. Everything normal. Everything explainable. But the timing of it was wrong. It wasn't random. It sounded deliberate. Welcome home, I muttered to myself and lay back down. The next day, I chalked it up to animals. Maybe raccoons in the crawl space. Maybe a stray cat. Maybe the previous owner had left behind a spiteful ghost with a foot fetish for floorboards. I bought a flashlight and a can of foam sealant because nothing says responsible homeowner like fighting the unknown with expanding goo. I found the crawlspace access behind a little door in the kitchen floor, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for secrets. The wood panel lifted with a squeal like it was offended to be disturbed. A wave of cold air rose up, smelling like damp dirt and old insulation. I shone the flashlight down. It was cramped and dusty, with cobwebs glittering like tiny warning flags. I could see support beams and uneven earth, nothing dramatic. No glowing eyes. No ominous breathing. Just darkness and the suggestion that whatever lived down there didn't pay rent. Okay, I said because I talk to spaces when I'm nervous. If you're a raccoon, this is your notice. I'm not above being unreasonable. Nothing moved. My flashlight beam shook slightly, mostly because I was annoyed at myself for feeling spooked. I lowered the panel back down and sealed a few gaps along the baseboards, then got on with the real work, unpacking. The house wasn't just abandoned. It was neglected. The wallpaper peeled like sunburn. The floors dipped in places like they were tired. The kitchen sink dripped in an endless rhythm that made me want to confess things I'd never done. But it was mine, and I had a plan. The plan was simple. Fix it myself, save money, and prove I was the kind of man who could handle things. Which, in hindsight, is the exact attitude that gets men into trouble in horror stories and relationships. Night 2, the thumps came back. This time they weren't just 1 or 2. They were patterned. 3 thumps. Pause. 2 thumps. A longer pause. A scrape, like something dragged gently across dirt. I sat on my sleeping bag, staring at the floor like it might suddenly open and reveal a tiny drummer with a grudge. The rational part of me said it was shifting beams. The other part said it sounded like someone trying to communicate. The The third, more ridiculous part of me said it sounded like the house had learned my schedule and was making sure I didn't get too comfortable. I pressed my ear to the floorboard. The sound stopped immediately. That's when I got my first real chill. Because coincidence is one thing, but stopping the moment I listened felt like awareness. Like whatever was down there had been waiting to see if I'd respond. I leaned back, cleared my throat, and said quietly, "I can hear you, you know." I waited, expecting nothing. A single thump answered. I stared at the spot in the floor where it came from, then laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "Okay," I said. "So, we're doing this." I didn't sleep much after that. Not because I was terrified, but because my brain wouldn't shut up. It kept running through possibilities, trying to match the sound to something normal. Plumbing?
No.
Animals? Maybe, but animals don't stop politely when spoken to. Foundation settling? Sure, but it doesn't respond on cue like it's being dramatic on purpose. The next morning, in full daylight, the whole thing seemed less sinister and more irritating. I made coffee, stood in the kitchen looking at the old crawlspace panel, and told myself I'd check again. Properly this time. With tools. With confidence. With the energy of a man who still believes he can win arguments with reality. I bought a cheap motion sensor light and a little camera, the kind meant for watching pets when you're away. I told myself it was for security. Really, it was because I needed proof that I wasn't hallucinating conversations with my flooring. That night, I set the camera pointing at the crawlspace door and taped the motion light beside it. Then I sat on the couch, pretending to watch a show while my eyes kept flicking toward the kitchen. At 2:11 a.m., the motion light clicked on. I felt my stomach drop. The crawlspace panel didn't move. Nothing visible happened. But the light stayed on for 10 seconds, then went dark. The thumps began again, quieter now, as if whoever was down there had realized I'd set up some kind of boundary. "Really?" I whispered. "You're going to get shy now?" No answer. Just the soft scraping sound, slower than before, like something trying not to be noticed. That's when the adult part of me finally sat up and said, "You should leave. You should call someone. You should not be a stubborn idiot." But I didn't. Because the other part of me, the part that bought an abandoned house and thought it was romantic, had latched onto the idea that this was a mystery meant for me to solve. And also because my brain did something ridiculous. It framed the whole thing as a test of confidence. Like whatever was beneath my house wasn't threatening me, but checking me, watching me, seeing what kind of man I was. Which is absurd. I know that now. But at the time, lying there listening to thumps that felt almost measured, I couldn't stop my thoughts from wandering into the worst kind of interpretation. The kind where you start imagining intention behind every sound. The kind where you start thinking, is this flirting? I rolled onto my side, pressed my palm to the floor, and said softly, "If you're going to keep knocking, at least pick a better hour." The scraping stopped. A pause. Then, right under my hand, I felt a faint vibration, like someone had tapped back, gentler than before, almost careful. I froze, breath caught. The motion light clicked on again. And in that moment, staring at the glow spilling across the kitchen floor, I realized two things at once. 1. I wasn't alone in this house. 2. Whatever was beneath me had just learned that I would answer. The human moved in 3 days earlier than my projections predicted, which immediately complicated everything. The shelter beneath the structure was designed for observation, not coexistence. It had been built decades ago by surveyors who assumed the house above would rot quietly, collapse naturally, and be forgotten by the local population. That assumption failed the moment a human looked at the listing price and thought, "I can fix that." From the first night, I listened to him move across the floor above me. His footsteps were heavy, confident, uneven in a way that suggested he wasn't afraid of breaking something that already looked broken. Humans walk like they expect the ground to forgive them. That alone was enough to make my kind nervous. The first thump I made was accidental. A recalibration slip. The dirt floor shifted under my weight as I adjusted the resonance dampener, and the vibration traveled straight up through the foundation. I froze, waiting for the response I'd been trained to expect: panic, shouting, retreat. Instead, He muttered something and lay back down. That should have been my warning. The second night, I was more careful. I mapped his movement patterns, his breathing, his sleep cycles. Humans, I'd learned, were very consistent when they believed they were alone. The shelter sensors picked up his heart rate spiking briefly when I shifted position, then settling again almost immediately. Curiosity outweighed fear. That was not normal. When he pressed his ear to the floor and spoke directly to it, my systems locked up in shock. Humans were not supposed to address unknown spaces verbally. They were supposed to assume danger or dismiss it. Direct engagement was categorized as high-risk behavior. I stopped moving at once. That part was instinctual. Prey freezes. Observers freeze. Anyone who wants to remain hidden freezes. Then he laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not strained. A short, sharp sound of disbelief mixed with amusement. Like he'd just realized the situation was stranger than expected and decided to enjoy it anyway. I logged that sound carefully. Laughter, according to our archives, often appeared when humans encountered stress they couldn't immediately resolve. It was not a sign of surrender. It was a sign of escalation. The following day, he opened the crawl space. I retreated deeper into the shelter, adjusting the camouflage field to maximum opacity. Through the sensor feed, I watched him shine a light down, squinting, frowning, talking to himself as if the darkness owed him answers. He threatened raccoons. I did not know what a raccoon was, but his tone suggested he would not negotiate with it. When he sealed the panel again, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The shelter hummed softly as systems stabilized. I told myself the incident was over. Humans were inquisitive, but lazy. He would rationalize the sounds and move on. Then he brought tools. The vibrations were aggressive. Hammer strikes traveled cleanly through the soil, rattling structural supports I hadn't touched in years. The noise was constant, unapologetic, and entirely unbothered by the possibility of consequences. My species evolved in silence. We announce ourselves carefully. Humans announce themselves by accident and then keep going out of spite. That night, I tried to remain completely still. The problem was the timing. The human sleep cycle synchronized with my maintenance cycle in the worst possible way. Every adjustment I made to keep the shelter stable happened when he was most alert. Every vibration he noticed aligned perfectly with moments when he was already restless. From his perspective, it must have seemed intentional. From mine, it was catastrophic coincidence. When the motion sensor activated, I nearly severed power to the entire shelter. The sudden light triggered a cascade of warnings across my interface. Surveillance devices were not part of the acceptable observation risk model. Humans who installed cameras were classified as proactive. Proactive humans were the reason the shelter existed in the first place. I froze again, crouched in the dirt, heart pounding as the light clicked off. The thumps I made afterward were smaller, restrained, an attempt to relocate without drawing attention. I failed.
He spoke to me again.
This time, not curious. Casual. Familiar. You're going to get shy now? I did not understand the words fully, but the tone made my skin prickle. It carried no threat. No fear. It carried expectation. As if he assumed whoever was beneath him was responding emotionally rather than tactically. That was worse. By the fourth night, I understood the error. Humans do not treat unknown presences as predators by default. They treat them as potential participants in social exchange. Silence invites interpretation. Movement invites narrative. The more ambiguous the behavior, the more confident the human becomes in filling the gaps. The tapping he felt beneath his hand was a mistake, a reflex. I had intended to stabilize a shifting beam. Instead, the vibration traveled directly to his palm, and he went completely still. I watched his heart rate spike, then slow. His breathing deepened. The reaction pattern did not match fear. It matched the tension. The motion light activated again. I recoiled, scrambling back into shadow, the camouflage field struggling to reassert itself smoothly. For a fraction of a second, I suspected the system had failed completely. I prepared contingency measures, emergency evacuation routes, data purge protocols, psychological dampeners in case direct contact became unavoidable. And still I listened. He didn't flee. He didn't barricade himself. He didn't call anyone. He lay there, alert, awake, present, as if he were waiting for the next move in a conversation he believed we were already having. That was when I understood the deeper problem. Humans do not require confirmation to commit to an assumption. They escalate based on belief alone. When he installed the camera, I felt something unfamiliar twist in my chest. Not fear. Not panic. Something closer to embarrassment. The realization that I had been seen, not visually but understood, as a participant rather than a threat. I watched the device through the shelter feed, its lens unblinking, its position deliberate. He hadn't hidden it particularly well. He wasn't trying to trap me. He was trying to understand. My disguise systems were not designed for scrutiny at that range. When I approached the camera later, curiosity overriding caution, the field wavered. For a fraction of a second, my outline failed to align with human anatomy. I knew immediately he would see it. I also knew what would follow. Humans, when confronted with proof that contradicts their assumptions, do not retreat. They adapt. The pawing sounds I made afterward were uncoordinated, rushed, lacking the careful spacing I'd practiced. If he noticed, it was because I wanted him to. The illusion of control was gone. The only thing left was acknowledgement. Above me, the human walked the house the next morning as if nothing had changed. No frantic movements. No preparations for escape. Just the steady pace of someone who had decided this situation was strange, but manageable. I logged a final note before shutting down non-essential systems. Assessment update. Humans are not dangerous because they are aggressive. Humans are dangerous because they assume coexistence is inevitable. And once they decide that, they start planning around you. By the 5th day, the house stopped feeling abandoned and started feeling occupied in a way that didn't show up on any paperwork. I didn't rush the confrontation. That surprised me most. There was a version of myself that should have grabbed a flashlight, pried open the crawl space, and demanded answers like confidence alone could scare reality into behaving. Instead, I slowed down. I made breakfast. I let the house make its noises without commenting on them. I gave whatever was under me space, which felt polite under the circumstances. The thing is, once you accept that something impossible is happening, the impossible stops being the problem. Logistics take over. Practical questions start lining up in your head like ducks waiting for breadcrumbs. For example, if someone was living under my house, they needed air. That meant vents. I checked the foundation and found one I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind dead ivy. Clean edges. Recently maintained. Not animal work. Careful work. Okay, I said quietly. You're organized. That night, I cooked extra food. Nothing fancy. Just more than one person needed. I left it on the kitchen counter. Not near the crawl space. Not presented like an offering. Just available. If this was a misunderstanding, I wasn't going to make it worse by being dramatic. Around midnight, the house vibrated. Not a thump this time. A slow, almost hesitant shift, like weight transferring carefully. The food was gone by morning. The plate was clean. Not washed.
Cleaned.
As if someone didn't trust water they hadn't tested yet. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the empty plate. Well, I muttered. That answers one question. The noises changed after that. They became quieter, closer to the edges of my hearing. Less accidental. More conversational. The house no longer sounded like it was settling. It sounded like it was responding. I started talking out loud again. Not to bait, not to threaten, just to keep things from feeling one-sided. Humans hate one-sided situations. They fill the silence with meaning whether it's there or not. I'm fixing the bathroom tomorrow, I said one evening while washing dishes. It'll be loud. Just heads up. The vibrations paused. Then, very faintly, the floor hummed. A steady, even tremor that lasted 2 seconds and stopped. I laughed before I could stop myself. Got it. That was when it clicked. Whatever was under my house wasn't hiding because it wanted to hurt me. It was hiding because it wanted to avoid something. And judging by how carefully it reacted to my voice, that something was a noise.
It was me.
I set up a folding chair near the crawlspace door the next night, not aggressively, just visibly. I sat there with a drink and waited, not staring at the panel, just existing near it. The message was simple. I wasn't going anywhere, but I wasn't forcing anything either. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The house creaked like it always had, but the deeper movements stayed restrained, cautious. "You don't have to come out," I said eventually. "I just figured we should probably acknowledge each other." Silence stretched. Long enough that I started feeling ridiculous. Then the air shifted. Not a sound. A sensation. Like standing too close to a heat source you can't see. The crawlspace door didn't open, but the space around it felt occupied. Pressurized. A presence leaning toward the surface without breaking it. "I'm not mad," I added, because apparently that felt important. "I just need to know if I should stop renovating like a maniac." A pause. Then a voice. It didn't come from the crawlspace. It came from everywhere near it, layered and careful, like it was being tested as it traveled upward. "Your construction schedule is disruptive." I nearly fell out of the chair. Not screaming did not feel heroic in the moment. It felt like my brain short-circuited and forgot how panic worked. My mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That's fair," I said, because apparently that was the sentence I'd trained for my whole life. The silence afterward felt heavier, charged with surprise. I realized I wasn't the only one recalculating. "I wasn't expecting that," I added. "Neither was I," the voice replied. "You were supposed to flee." I snorted before I could help it. "Yeah, I get that a lot." There was a subtle shift, like the presence adjusted its posture. "You detected me earlier than projected." "You knocked," I said. I answered. "That was an error."
"Sure," I said.
"But you kept responding." Another pause. Longer this time. "You interpreted the vibrations incorrectly." I smiled into my drink. I interpret a lot of things incorrectly. It's a skill. The air pulsed, faintly. Not laughter, exactly, but something adjacent. "You assumed intent."
"Hard not to," I said.
"Most things don't tap back." That seemed to land. The pressure eased slightly, like the presence relaxed against the boundaries of the space. "Your species assigns meaning aggressively." "We call it optimism," I replied. "Sometimes it works." "I was hiding," the voice said. "From my own people." That got my attention in a way nothing else had. "Okay," I said slowly. "That's new. They consider humans destabilizing." I waited. "Because?" "Because you normalize anomalies," the voice said. "You do not escalate emotionally when faced with the unknown. You ask questions. You make jokes. You plan renovations." I laughed again, softer this time. "We cope by pretending things are manageable." "That is dangerous," the voice said. "Only if you don't adapt," I replied. Another pause. Then, "You offered food." "You took it," I said. Seemed mutual. It was not bait. I didn't think it was. Silence settled between us, not tense, just thoughtful. Like two neighbors realizing they'd been sharing a wall for longer than they'd admit. "I need to see you," I said finally. "Not because I don't believe you. Because I don't want to keep guessing." The pressure tightened again. "Direct exposure is not advised." "I get that," I said. "But I'm already in this. And I'd rather not keep talking to my floor like it's flirting with me." That earned a longer pulse. Amusement, maybe. Or stress. Hard to tell. "You misinterpret often," the voice said. "I own that," I replied. "But I also fix things."
"Badly."
"Loudly. Which means if you're staying, we should probably coordinate." Silence stretched. Then the crawlspace door creaked, not opening fully, just enough for light to spill downward. The air bent strangely, like it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to be. I leaned forward, careful not to rush. For a moment, I saw too many details at once. Pale skin that wasn't quite skin. Eyes that reflected light differently. Fox-like features layered over something older, sharper, more deliberate. The disguise shimmered, corrected itself, then flickered again. She recoiled slightly, clearly expecting something louder from me. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said. That explains a lot. You are not afraid, she said, confusion clear even through the modulation. I am, I admitted. Just not in the way you're expecting. She studied me, head tilted, tail, definitely a tail, twitching once before stilling. You apologize excessively, she observed. Habit, I said. So is assuming the best. That assumption is why we avoid you. I smiled, tired but sincere. And yet, here we are. She considered that. Then, very carefully, she nodded. Your house is unstable. Tell me about it. You will collapse my shelter if you continue. Then let's not do that, I said. I'll adjust. Her ears twitched again. You would alter your behavior? Yeah, I said. Roommate rules. That word seemed to confuse her more than anything else so far. Humans, she said slowly, treat first contact like a housing issue. Only the good ones, I replied. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house settled around us, old beams sighing like they always had. The world didn't end. No alarms went off. No fleets descended from the sky. She withdrew slightly, retreating back into the crawlspace, but not closing the door entirely. I will remain, she said. For now. Okay, I said. I'll be upstairs. Probably breaking something. I have noticed, she replied. As I stood up and walked away, I felt something shift, not under the house this time, but inside my chest. The realization that I hadn't stumbled into a threat or a fantasy. I'd stumbled into a negotiation. And somehow, without meaning to, I'd already convinced her that living with me was safer than facing her own people. Once you agree to coexist with an alien under your house, the situation stops being abstract and starts being about schedules. That was the first thing that surprised her. I didn't ask where she came from right away. I didn't demand explanations about galaxies or technology or why she looked like a fox-shaped idea of a person wearing a disguise she didn't fully trust. I asked when she needed quiet, which tools bothered her shelter the most, and whether the bathroom renovation could wait a few days without triggering an interstellar incident. She watched me like I was a malfunctioning piece of equipment. You're not prioritizing the correct variables, she said. Story of my life, I replied. But if I crack your ceiling, that's on me. Her ears twitched at that. I'd learned by then that ear movement meant processing, not threat. The tail did the opposite. Tail meant emotion she hadn't decided how to label yet. You would adjust your project timeline, she said slowly, for an unknown entity. For a neighbor, I corrected. Big difference. I am not your neighbor. You live under my house, I said. That's practically a shared wall. She stared at me, then looked at the crawlspace opening as if reconsidering the last several decades of her life choices. This is why humans are classified as socially hazardous, she muttered. We worked out rules. Quiet hours. Warning knocks. No sudden structural changes without discussion. She agreed not to rearrange anything that caused vibrations above a tolerable threshold. I agreed to stop referring to the floor as communicative. The double meanings didn't stop. They just got managed. When she said she needed space, she meant literal distance, not emotional retreat. When I said I'd check in later, I meant with my voice, not by tearing open the floor. We misfired constantly, but the difference was we caught ourselves before it spiraled. She explained, eventually, why she was hiding. Her species had sent surveyors to observe humanity generations ago. They'd expected violence, hierarchy, clear threat escalation. What they found instead unsettled them more. Humans normalized everything. You discovered something impossible, and then asked if it needed coffee. You met danger and negotiated terms. You laughed when the situation stopped making sense, not because it was funny, but because laughter let you keep going. They fear contamination, she said. Not biological. Behavioral. Yeah, I said. We're bad at leaving things alone. You assume interest, she continued. You respond to ambiguity with engagement. You do not retreat when faced with contradiction. You adapt. I thought that was a compliment, I said. It is, she replied, which is why it is dangerous. I thought about that while sanding a doorframe the next day, careful to stay within the vibration limits we'd agreed on. She stayed below, monitoring, occasionally humming in a frequency I felt more than heard. You know, I said aloud, most people would have panicked by now. Yes, she agreed. Most people are sensible. Glad I missed that phase. She didn't laugh the way humans do, but her tail moved in a way that suggested the concept amused her. You treat first contact like a maintenance issue. Everything is a maintenance issue if you ignore it long enough, I said. That night, she emerged fully for the first time. Not dramatically. No beams of light. No announcements. She simply stepped into the crawlspace opening and stood there, adjusting the camouflage field until it faded enough to show her real outline. Fox-like, yes, but not in the way people imagine. More precise. More intentional. Built for observation, not fantasy. I noticed she waited for my reaction. I didn't give her one. Not because I wasn't impressed. Because I'd learned that reacting too strongly made her nervous. So I nodded once and said, "You'll want shoes. The floor's uneven." She stared at me. "That's it," she asked. "I already knew you were real," I said. "Seeing the details just fills in gaps." "You are deeply unsettling," she said flatly. "Yeah," I replied. "That's the charm." Living like that wasn't easy. We argued. Mostly about assumptions. I assumed she'd tell me when something bothered her. She assumed I'd notice before it became a problem. Both of us were wrong often enough to make it interesting. The double meanings didn't go away either. When she said she was monitoring my patterns, I had to remind myself she meant movement, not behavior. When I said I was checking on her, she had to ask whether that meant verbally or physically. Every clarification felt like defusing a tiny misunderstanding bomb before it went off. But here's the thing no one tells you about humans. We're good at awkward. We survive on it. She stayed because leaving meant returning to a species that saw humans as a contagion. I let her stay because, honestly, the house felt less empty knowing someone else was there, even if she technically occupied the dirt beneath it. Eventually, she had to report back. She asked if I was afraid of that. "Of you leaving?" I asked.
Yeah.
"A little." "Of what my people might do," she clarified. I shrugged. "If they show up, we'll talk." She stared at me like I'd just suggested negotiating with a storm. "You cannot speak your way out of everything." "No," I agreed. "But we try first." When her report transmitted, she didn't hide it. She sat at the kitchen table, tail curled around the chair leg, eyes unfocused as data streamed out into whatever space listened. I waited. When she was done, she looked exhausted. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That humans are not hostile," she said. "They are worse." I raised an eyebrow. "They assimilate anomalies socially," she continued. "They reduce threats through familiarity. They destabilize observers by refusing to behave as expected." I smiled. "Sounds about right." "They will not approach you," she said. "Not yet. They will debate for years whether your behavior is a statistical outlier or a pattern." "And you?" I asked. She met my eyes. I recommended avoidance. I laughed. "Thanks." "You will be listed as a case study," she added. "Your address flagged." "Great," I said. "The house finally has a reputation." She watched me carefully then, like she was committing something to memory she didn't trust herself to keep otherwise. "You are not what we feared," she said. "And you're not what I expected," I replied. "That misunderstanding," she said slowly, "was educational." "Yeah," I agreed. "For both of us." She moved back toward the crawlspace later, but paused at the opening. "You will continue renovations." Carefully, I promised. "And you will warn me." "Every time." She nodded, then hesitated. "If I knock." "I'll answer," I said. That seemed to settle something in her. Life didn't go back to normal after that. It shifted. The house stayed old and loud and imperfect, but it felt shared. Less abandoned. Less haunted by assumptions. Sometimes, late at night, I'd feel a faint vibration under my feet. Not a warning. Not a signal. Just acknowledgement. And sometimes, when I walked through the house with tools in my hands and confidence I probably hadn't earned, I'd remember something she said once, quietly, like a confession. "You terrify us," she'd said, "because you don't realize what you're doing." She wasn't wrong. I bought an abandoned house expecting solitude and repairs. I ended up proving, by accident, exactly why humans were never supposed to be observed up close.